If you connect with real stories full of pain, resilience, and survival, make sure to subscribe now and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of the powerful stories we'll share here. I was already standing when the clerk called my name. The microphone crackled and the courtroom lights felt like hospital lamps turned on my face. My palms were damp and smelled faintly of the lemon soap from our kitchen sink, the one I had used every day for 16 years. The one I bought in bulk on sale for $3.99 because we were always saving for something that never quite arrived. The air tasted like old paper and cold dust. The judge adjusted his glasses and said words I did not hear until a single sentence cut through the cotton in my ears. "The other woman is expecting." It rang out with an echo that bent time. Expecting. Pregnant. My throat locked. A sound tried to rise and died inside me like a match in the rain. I looked to my left, toward the defense table, and there she was in a soft blue dress that floated around her knees like apology. She held her belly without touching it, as if even the room was not allowed to know. My husband stared straight ahead at the seal on the wall. He did not turn. He did not blink. He just breathed with the slow control of a man who had rehearsed this scene. That was the moment the floor moved, not down but away, as if the building slid from under my shoes, and I learned what it felt like to stand over a void you never knew you were building. People in the benches behind us shifted as though they had all expected this line to drop, and in that collective rustle, I heard what I had never heard at home. They knew. The bailiff knew. The young public defender with a coffee stain on his tie knew. The clerk with chipped nail polish knew. The woman in a gray cardigan who had seen 3 divorces in one morning knew. And the cousin of somebody who used to fix our roof when it leaked in July probably knew too, because word travels through families like smoke finds every crack in a house. I could see the judge watching me the way doctors watch patients who do not yet know the severity. I could read the caution in his posture. He spoke of decorum. He asked me to sit. I did not sit. I looked at the calendar on the wall, a cheap promotional thing from a local bank, and noticed the red square around June 21st, the day we were supposed to pay the last installment on the loan we took for his second chance, $872.19. He said the investment would turn around by spring. He said construction was slow in winter. He said men need faith in hard months. I gave him years. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever faced a situation that completely changed your life? Share your story in the comments. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe, because your support helps these voices reach even more people. The sound of the gavel was softer than movies make it. This was not a dramatic crack. It was a measured tap, like a polite neighbor at your door, just before they hand you a letter that will change your life. The judge moved on with words about support and schedules and shared responsibility, and I realized he was talking about 2 households now, and that the math of our life had always been hiding an extra column. My eyes kept going back to her hand, curved near her midsection, and I could not stop imagining the exact day the doctor told her, the exact white paper on the exam table, the exact smell of antiseptic, and the fluorescent hum of lights, while on that same day, my husband told me not to wait up because the job site ran late and the concrete needed to cure overnight. I had set aside chicken soup for him, a plastic container labeled M for Marco, next to the 2 I labeled L and S for Luca and Sophia, because I learned long ago that order is how you survive chaos. I saw myself writing those letters with a black marker, lining them like soldiers in the fridge, certain I was caring for the people who were my whole world. I saw the black marker glide over the plastic, while somewhere else the doctor pointed at a grainy screen, and a heartbeat flickered and the woman in blue cried, and my husband touched her shoulder. The room tilted. I found the wooden table in front of me and gripped its edge with both hands. I have stood in many rooms. A rental office at 22 with carpet that smelled like wet dog where I signed a lease for our first apartment, because he was still on a job out of town. A bank at 29 where I argued kindly for a lower interest rate with a manager who pretended not to notice my trembling voice. A kindergarten hallway at 30 when Luca's teacher, Ms. Ortega, told me he was already reading chapter books, and I felt briefly as if the future opened like a window. Those rooms had cheap chairs and buzzing lights and a coffee machine that hissed and spit and needed cleaning, but they also had hope. This courtroom had none. Here the hope was stripped, weighed, priced, and traded in for orders with case numbers. The clerk read numbers that sounded like shackles. The attorney whispered to me to breathe. My husband kept his eyes on the seal as if it might forgive him. All the small economies of our life paraded through my mind like receipts. My spreadsheet from the past 7 years with columns labeled rent utilities, groceries, fuel, school shoes, dentist copays, Christmas gifts, emergency. I could see the notes I had typed at 1 in the morning after closing the cafe where I worked weekends. September, mom's medication 324. October, radiator leak 97. November, Luca's cleats 50, and he will outgrow them by spring. December, Sophia's winter coat 40, and pretend we can pass it down, but she is our last. January, the transmission we could not afford that we postponed because he promised a bonus by March. And March came, and the bonus did not. I sold my grandmother's ring for $280, and he said we would buy it back after the job in Pittsburgh. He never went to Pittsburgh. He went to the blue dress. When the judge said the words preliminary order of support for the unborn child, my breath finally came back, but it came sharp and tasted like metal. I thought of our joint account reduced to $23.11 last Monday, and how he stood in our kitchen and said the bank must have double-charged the gas station. There is a flavor to betrayal that no writer truly captures. It is not fire. It is not ice. It is the dull medical taste of gauze in your mouth while someone stitches a wound you cannot see. I felt it coat my tongue while the attorney talked about dates and the judge asked about income and hours. I heard myself say I work 32 hours at the community center and 12 at the cafe and sometimes pick up cleaning on Sundays. I said it like a stranger reading facts. He said he was between contracts. I felt the weight of that phrase, between contracts. For 3 years he had been between contracts, between hope and reality, between lies and the silence I generously called patience. He had my patience like a line of credit he never planned to repay. When the hearing paused and the sides were told to meet in the hallway, I walked out into a corridor that smelled like old coffee and winter coats. The humming vending machine displayed potato chips for $1.75. Coins clinked. 2 attorneys laughed softly at a joke that had nothing to do with me. My phone buzzed with a message from Sophia at 11:14. "Mom, did you pack my blue notebook?" I stared at the screen until the letters went blurry. I typed back yes in a hand I did not recognize. My husband stood 6 feet away talking to the woman in blue, not touching, not smiling, his voice low. I realized then that we had not really spoken for months. We had exchanged logistics. We had texted school pickups and plumbers and receipts, and he had kissed the air near my cheek like a cousin at a barbecue. I had called it endurance. I had called it marriage. A draft from the stairwell lifted a paper cup and rolled it toward my shoe. I nudged it aside and remembered a night in 2012 when our heater died, and we slept in coats on the couch under 3 blankets and laughed until we cried at our foggy breath. Memory can be cruel. It lights the soft rooms just as you stand in the hard one. I found a bench and sat finally, bones heavy, and counted backwards to keep from crying in public. 12 years since we moved into the row house on East Maple. 8 years since I first suspected he was drinking more than he said. 5 years since I started tracking cash withdrawals that had no receipts. 3 years since we stopped arguing about anything real because arguments require belief in change. 1 year since I asked if there was someone else, and he smiled like a man who says, "Of course not," because he has learned the exact speed at which to lie. I remembered the night I asked. March 9th. Rain ticking on the windows. The TV throwing blue light across his face. He said he loved me. He said he was tired. He said work was hard. He said I should trust him. He said we needed a vacation. He said everything except the thing that would have saved me time. The corridor clock clicked louder than it needed to. Somewhere down the hall, a child cried and was shushed. When we went back in, the judge spoke as if he were dividing furniture. He used words like equitable and interim and stipulated. I felt myself floating above the room, seeing the tops of heads, the bald crown of a clerk, the edge of a worn rug, the scuff marks on the baseboards where chairs had scraped for years. I thought about the tomorrow morning version of me who would wake up at 6:15, grind coffee, slice apples for Sophia, sign Luca's permission slip for the field trip to the science museum that costs $15 we do not have, and pretend nothing had happened because children deserve breakfast before truth. The judge asked if I had anything to say. It was a formality. I said no, Your Honor. My voice did not shake. I looked at my husband then, really looked. There was a small cut on his knuckle, and a trace of pain on his wrist, and the blue of a bruise near his collarbone that did not belong to our life. I remembered the yellow measuring tape he kept in the drawer, the way he used to pull it out and snap it back with a smile, the exaggerated pop it made. He once measured the kitchen table just to see if it would fit a puzzle we wanted to start as a family. We never bought the puzzle. Busy, he said. Later, I said. Later had arrived carrying someone else's heartbeat. The judge set a date in July. The clerk wrote it down. The gavel nodded again. People stood. Doors opened. Coats were pulled tight against late spring wind that blew down the steps outside with a smell of rain and bus exhaust. I gathered my purse and the folder with documents and the mint I had not eaten because the paper stuck to it. I walked out without touching anyone. The hallway was a river. The river had a current. The current wanted to carry me toward the exit, and I let it. On the steps I stopped and closed my eyes and let the wind slap my face the way mothers used to do when children fainted in old movies. Across the street, a man sold umbrellas for $5. A woman in a red scarf laughed into her phone. A bus roared and turned the corner. I stood there and understood in a way that had weight and temperature that the line between my life before and my life after had been drawn in that room, and it would not erase just because I begged it to. I opened my eyes and saw my reflection in the glass of the courthouse door. I looked older than this morning, 10 years older, a lifetime older. I looked like someone who had learned a new language in a single hour. The language of what now? The night after court, I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the carpet fibers as if they could answer me. The children were asleep in their rooms, doors slightly ajar the way they liked. One nightlight glowing orange against painted walls that still smelled faintly of last summer's renovation. I held my phone in both hands but could not type, could not call, could not do anything but scroll up and down a blank screen. My body remembered work at 6:30 the next morning, remembered lunches to pack and alarms to set, but my mind was fixed on the words I had heard in that sterile room. The other woman is expecting. I repeated it like a chant that would make it lose power. It did not. Each time it grew heavier, like a stone swelling in water. I realized that while I was calculating coupons at the supermarket, he was calculating months of her pregnancy. While I was ironing his shirt for a job that never existed, he was buying her prenatal vitamins. While I was skipping meals to stretch our budget, he was splitting secrets that devoured everything I thought we had built. The shame was not just in the betrayal, but in the scale of my blindness. I tried to replay the years in reverse, searching for a point where I could have stopped the avalanche. The night in 2019, when I found 2 receipts in his jacket pocket, both from a restaurant across town where I had never been. He said they were for clients. The time in 2021 when he forgot his phone at home and it buzzed with a message that only said thank you and a heart. He said it was spam. The day last winter when he came home with a jacket I had never seen before and claimed it was on clearance. I told myself love requires trust, and trust requires silence. I called it loyalty. In truth, it was surrender. He learned how much silence I could carry and filled it with his own comfort. My silence paid his bills, cooked his dinners, covered his lies. In that courtroom, I understood that the silence had been heard by everyone but me. They had known long before I did. That was the cut that would not clot. The world had looked at me, pitied me, nodded behind my back, while I packed sandwiches and balanced the checkbook. Betrayal is sharp, but humiliation seeps slow like ink through paper. I walked to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. 3 containers lined neatly on the middle shelf, leftover pasta for Luca, chicken rice for Sophia, a Tupperware with vegetables for me. His container was gone. He had not eaten at home in weeks, claiming he was too tired or too busy. I closed the door and stood in the faint hum of the motor. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I thought of the request he made in March, just weeks before everything collapsed. He asked me to co-sign another loan, $15,000, for equipment he claimed he needed for a contract in Baltimore. He swore it would double by summer. I said yes, because I had always said yes. The truth stabbed me now. That money was never for a contract. It was for the child I heard about in front of strangers. My savings, my labor, my signature underlined her future. The impossible request had been delivered as if it were nothing more than trust. I gave it because that was my role in his play. Now the bank would call me when he disappeared. Now the debt was my inheritance. I sat at the table and thought of my children. How many years had I told them their father was working late, that their father was trying, that their father loved them? I had covered his absence with bedtime stories and school projects, held the camera at birthdays while he was elsewhere. They would ask me tomorrow why I looked older. They would not ask what I had heard. They would not be able to carry it. I would carry it for them until I could not. I pictured their faces in court one day if this dragged longer, hearing words children should never hear. My chest tightened until I pressed my palm against it. I remembered my own father leaving when I was 9, remembered the suitcase by the door and my mother folding shirts with shaking hands. I swore that day I would never repeat her story. Now I was the mother with trembling hands, holding back tears so the house would not crack under them. The betrayal had layers I had not peeled yet. There was the fact of the pregnancy. There was the fact everyone knew. And then there was the fact that I had built my entire adulthood around his shadow. 16 years of faith turned to a file in a courthouse. My friends had stopped inviting me out because I always said I could not afford it. My mother had warned me once in 2008 when he missed Luca's baptism. She said men who forget God will forget family. I called her bitter then. She is dead now and cannot say I told you so, but her voice rang anyway. I wanted to scream, but the children slept. I wanted to run, but the walls stood. I wanted to stop time, but the clock on the microwave ticked forward with green digits that cared nothing for me. I pulled out a notebook where I tracked bills and wrote 3 words in shaky pen. No more silence. The ink bled a little into the paper. I closed it and slid it back into the drawer. I had not yet planned what that would mean. Divorce, maybe. Confrontation, surely. But more than that, it meant refusing to let him narrate my life. For years I had followed his script, playing the role of the supportive wife while he wrote scenes elsewhere. In court, the curtain fell. Tonight, on the edge of my bed, I realized I could write a different one. My body still shook, my stomach still churned. But beneath it all, there was the faintest ember of something I had not felt in years. Anger. Yes, but also clarity. The clarity of a woman who has nothing left to lose but her chains. The next morning, the world looked exactly the same, and nothing at all was the same. The sky was gray in that flat way early spring often carries, clouds pressing low, but the birds still sang in the maple outside Luca's window. I poured coffee into the same chipped mug I had used for years, the one with a faded flower that had survived a dozen moves and 2 dishwashers. The steam rose and smelled of routine, but it no longer comforted me. Every ordinary detail felt like a disguise now, like the house itself was trying to trick me into believing nothing had changed. I watched the children eat cereal at the table, Luca tapping his spoon like a drumstick, Sophia braiding and unbraiding a doll's hair, and I forced my face into calm. They looked at me with the unquestioning trust children give their mother, and I swallowed hard because I had become the wall between them and a storm they did not yet see. I answered their questions about homework and field trips with a steady voice, but inside I could hear the echo of that courtroom sentence pounding against my ribs. The other woman is expecting. It was there in every breath I took. After dropping them at school, I drove without direction. The streets of our town passed like film reels I had seen too many times. The laundromat with the peeling red sign, the corner store where the cashier always smiled, the faded mural on the library wall painted by students 20 years ago. These places had been the backdrop of my sacrifices. Each brick and sidewalk held pieces of me. Extra shifts, canceled outings, pennies saved in jars. I parked in front of the library but did not go inside. Instead, I sat in the car with my hands on the steering wheel and let memory drag me backward. To 2015, when he convinced me to cash out my small savings for a business he swore would secure our future. To 2017, when he said the truck needed repairs and I gave up my chance at night classes to cover the cost. To 2020, when I worked through the pandemic, masked and exhausted, disinfecting every corner of the community center, while he said jobs were scarce. At every crossroad, I had chosen him. And now, in 2025, the price of those choices stood in a courthouse in a blue dress, carrying his child. I thought of my mother again, the way she whispered once that men like him survive because women like us believe. She worked 2 jobs after my father left and carried bitterness like a second skin. I promised myself never to live that way. Yet here I was, sitting in a car outside the same library she once took me to, replaying lies I had swallowed to keep our family intact. My phone buzzed with a message from him. Just 4 words. "We need to talk." I stared at it for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen. The audacity of it. As if the court had not already said everything. As if the years of deception could be compacted into a casual sentence. I did not reply. I turned the phone face down on the passenger seat and stared at the library mural. The bright paint now faded to ghost colors. In the days that followed, whispers circled faster than wind. A neighbor avoided my eyes at the market. A friend from church hesitated too long before asking how I was. Even the cashier at the pharmacy gave me a look that lingered. I understood then that the humiliation was not private. It had leaked into streets and pews, into gossip and nods, and I was the last to receive it. My anger grew sharp. I had once thought pain dulled you, but this sharpened me. Carved edges I did not know I had. Every glance that carried pity only fueled me more. I began to see clearly that what I carried was not only betrayal, but the weight of being played for a fool. That was the part that burned worst. Not that he had another life, but that everyone else had seen the cracks while I kept painting over them. One evening, I pulled down a box from the closet shelf, the one marked taxes, receipts, loans. I spread the papers across the floor like puzzle pieces. Numbers stared back at me, silent witnesses to years of sacrifice. I traced the lines of ink that represented hours of my life. Pay stubs, bills, overdraft notices, promises to repay. In those papers I saw the truth I had refused to see in his eyes. The money never vanished into thin air. It had traveled, step by step, into another household. My wages had been split between my children's shoes and his secret child's future. The discovery was not just betrayal. It was theft. Theft of my labor, my time, my trust. I pressed my palms against the floor to steady myself. A memory surfaced of him once saying, "You don't understand how hard it is for men to carry all this responsibility." I laughed bitterly into the empty room. The responsibility had always been mine. That night I could not sleep. The house creaked with its usual sounds, pipes groaning, wind pressing against old windows. But I lay awake listening to a silence that had changed shape. It was no longer heavy with doubt. It was sharpened with decision. I understood for the first time that leaving would not be the greatest loss. Staying would. Staying meant handing my children a script of silence and humiliation. Leaving meant giving them a story of survival. When dawn came and light spilled through the curtains, I rose not as the woman who had entered court days ago, but as someone who had seen behind every curtain and refused to bow. I met him 2 days later in the small diner near the highway, the one with chipped red booths and coffee that always tastes burnt. He chose the place, probably because it was far enough from town to avoid familiar faces. When I walked in, he was already there, hunched over a cup, stirring sugar he would never drink. His hands moved nervously, a rhythm I had seen before when he was lying but trying to look calm. The fluorescent light above us buzzed and flickered, the soundtrack of confessions. I slid into the booth across from him without a word. He lifted his eyes, those same eyes I had trusted for 16 years, and for the first time I did not recognize them. They were rehearsed, calculating, waiting for me to give him a line he could use. I stayed silent. Silence made him speak. He said he never meant for it to happen. He said it was complicated. He said he still loved me. The words spilled like coins onto the table, empty currency, and I watched them roll away without reaching for a single one. The waitress poured coffee into my cup, the steam rising between us like a curtain. I kept my hands around the mug, the heat burning my palms just enough to keep me steady. I asked him one question. When did it start? He looked away, his jaw tightening, and muttered something about years blending together. That was the moment the air left my chest. Not weeks, not months, years. I thought back to birthdays he had missed, holidays explained with excuses, business trips that never produced contracts. The timeline rearranged itself in my head like a cruel puzzle snapping into place. The child she carried was not the beginning of betrayal. It was the proof of years stolen from me, from our children, from the life I had been told we were building. My stomach twisted so hard I thought I might be sick. I asked again, louder this time. When? He whispered 2018. I remembered 2018 clearly. That was the year I worked 3 jobs when the mortgage almost collapsed. That was the year I fainted in the community center bathroom from exhaustion, and he said I should take better care of myself. While I was drowning, he was elsewhere planting another life. The diner clattered with plates and silverware, but inside that booth time froze. I saw his mouth moving, excuses forming, but all I could hear was the roar of my own realization. I had begged him in 2019 to see a counselor when we barely spoke at night. He said therapy was a waste of money. I had believed him. Now I understood therapy would have been a mirror he could not afford to face. Instead, he built a parallel world and let me break my body to sustain it. He said he had wanted to tell me. He said he hadn't known how. I stared at the cracks in the table's laminate and thought of all the times he had known how to ask for my paycheck, my signature, my loyalty. He had known how to do that perfectly well. He just hadn't known how to give me the truth. At some point, he reached across the table, his fingers stretching toward mine. I pulled my hand back. The gesture hit him harder than any word. His shoulders slumped. He muttered about mistakes, about redemption, about being a father to all his children. I let him speak until his voice circled the same tired lines. Then I leaned forward and said slowly, "You already chose which family to betray. The rest is not mine to fix." His eyes darted, panic flickering, because he understood then that the woman he had relied on to carry his lies was no longer sitting across from him. In her place was someone who had seen every shadow he cast and decided to step out of it. He tried one last time, saying we had history, saying we had love, saying we had built a life. I thought of the papers spread on my living room floor, of debts and receipts, of nights I had cried quietly so the children would not hear. That was not love. That was labor disguised as devotion. When I stood to leave, he grabbed my wrist. The diner lights reflected off the silver band of my wedding ring, the ring that now felt like a shackle. I looked at it for a long second before sliding my arm free. His voice cracked as he asked where I was going. I told him the truth he never gave me. Away. Then I walked out, the bell above the door jingling like an announcement. The sky outside had cleared, the gray clouds broken into patches of blue. I inhaled deeply, the air sharp and cold, and realized I had not truly breathed in years. My phone buzzed in my pocket with a message from the bank reminding me of an overdue payment. For the first time, the weight of that number did not crush me. It was heavy, yes, but it was mine, and I would face it without lies poisoning every corner of my life. That night, I told the children he would not be home for a while. Their eyes filled with questions I could not answer yet. So I wrapped them in blankets and sat between them until they fell asleep. As I listened to their soft breaths, I promised myself they would not inherit silence. They would see their mother fight. They would see her stand. They would know betrayal does not end a life. It begins a new one. The weeks that followed felt like living inside a storm that never stopped circling. Letters arrived from the bank with red stamps. Phone calls came from numbers I recognized but could not answer, and whispers trailed me in the grocery aisles. Yet, under the weight of it all, there was a strange clarity settling in my bones. Each morning I woke at 6:15, brewed coffee, packed lunches, signed permission slips, and walked my children to school. Routine became my anchor, the proof that life moved forward even as everything I thought I knew collapsed. At night, when the silence stretched too wide, I opened the notebook I had filled with numbers and memories and began to write not only what he had taken but what I had given. Hours, years, sacrifices, all cataloged in my hand. For the first time, I was not writing to keep track of survival. I was writing to remind myself that my story was mine to tell. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, I spread those papers across the floor again, the way I had the night after court. But this time I looked at them differently. Instead of seeing loss, I saw evidence. Evidence of strength, of endurance, of everything I had managed while he built his other life in secret. Each receipt was a testament to my resilience. I touched the one from 2012, when I bought Luca's asthma medication with money I had saved for a new coat. I held the one from 2016, when I paid Sophia's dentist bill with tips from late shifts at the cafe. They were not just debts, they were proofs of love written in ink. I realized then that while his betrayal defined his choices, it did not define mine. My sacrifices had meaning, even if he had twisted them for his own lies. The turning point came on a Thursday afternoon when the school called to tell me Sophia had forgotten her lunch. I drove back with a sandwich wrapped in foil, and when I handed it to her, she looked at me with a smile that lit up her whole face. That small moment struck me harder than any courtroom sentence. It was proof that what mattered most had not been destroyed. My children's trust was still intact. Their love was still here. And if I held on to that, no betrayal could erase the future we could build together. I walked back to the car with a steadiness I had not felt in months. The weight on my chest lifted just enough to let in air that tasted like freedom. A week later, I met with a lawyer, not in a grand office, but in a small building above a bakery where the smell of fresh bread filled the hall. The lawyer was calm, her eyes sharp but kind, and she laid out the steps ahead like a map. Divorce, custody, division of assets. Words that had once terrified me now sounded like tools. Each paper I would sign was not another burden, but a brick laid on the path out of silence. She warned me it would be long. It would be messy. It would be painful. I nodded. I had lived long and messy and painful already. At least now the pain had direction. I walked out with papers in my bag and the scent of bread clinging to my coat, thinking how strange it was that freedom sometimes smells like yeast and flour. Still, the nights were hard. Lying awake, I could hear my thoughts louder than the ticking clock. They came in waves: anger, grief, disbelief. But beneath them all was something new, something steady. A voice that whispered, "You are not broken. You are beginning." I clung to it. I repeated it when doubt tried to pull me under. And slowly, I started to believe it. I looked at myself in the mirror one morning and saw not just the lines of exhaustion, but the strength carved into them. The kind of strength only born from surviving what should have destroyed you. I traced my wedding ring with my finger, then slipped it off and set it on the dresser. The mark it left on my skin faded within days, but the lesson it left would never fade. The discovery in court had shattered me, but in the shards, I found pieces of myself I had forgotten: my will, my anger, my voice. I understood now that betrayal was not the end of my story. It was the turning of a page. The chapter ahead was unwritten, and for the first time in years, I would hold the pen. The official papers arrived in a large brown envelope, heavier than it looked. Inside were words that confirmed what my heart already knew. The marriage was over. I sat at the kitchen table, the same place where for years I had balanced checkbooks and cut coupons, and stared at the documents spread before me. The house was silent except for the ticking of the old wall clock. I picked up a pen and signed my name again and again, each stroke both a wound and a release. With every signature, I felt the weight of years shifting, loosening, falling away. It was not victory, not yet, but it was movement. My hand shook when I placed the final page back in the envelope. I remembered the girl I was when I first said yes to him. 24, hopeful, convinced love was stronger than anything life could throw at us. I wanted to reach back through time and hold her face gently, tell her the road would be cruel, but she would survive. In the days that followed, I noticed how the air in the house began to change. Without his presence, the rooms felt lighter. I no longer listened for the sound of his boots on the porch, no longer waited for the key to turn in the lock. The silence that once suffocated me now became a kind of sanctuary. I filled it with music the children loved, with laughter when we cooked together, with prayers whispered at night that sounded more like gratitude than desperation. The fear of what others thought began to fade too. At the market, at church, at school pickup, I stopped lowering my eyes. Let them whisper. Let them pity. Their opinions could not touch me anymore. They had not carried my burdens. They had not walked my nights. I had, and I was still here. One Saturday, I took Luca and Sophia to the park. The sky was clear, the air warm, and I sat on a bench watching them chase each other through the grass. Their laughter rose like bells, echoing in the open air. I felt tears sting my eyes, but for the first time they were not born of grief. They were tears of something softer, almost fragile, hope. In that moment I understood that rebuilding would not be quick, but it had already begun. Every smile I saw on their faces was a brick laid. Every small joy a wall raised against the ruins of betrayal. I realized then that what my husband had destroyed was his own future, not mine. What he abandoned was his role in this family, not the family itself. We were still whole, even with a piece missing. The reflection that came with this clarity was sharp. I saw how easily a life can be stolen when you hand over all your trust without keeping any for yourself. I saw how silence feeds lies until they grow too large to contain. And I saw how love, if it is not mutual, becomes labor disguised as devotion. These were lessons carved into me by years of sacrifice and one brutal revelation. They will not leave me, and perhaps they are the scars that will guide me forward. Because survival is not just breathing through pain. It is choosing every day to rise from it, to carve a new story even when the old one tried to bury you. That night, after the children fell asleep, I opened the window and let the cool air wash through the room. The street was quiet, the sky scattered with stars. I whispered into the darkness words I had not said aloud before. I forgive myself. Not him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But myself. For believing too long. For giving too much. For carrying silence. And in that whisper, I felt something release deep inside, like a knot loosening after years of strain. It was not the end of the journey, but it was the first true step toward peace. The summer arrived with its heat pressing against the windows, cicadas buzzing in the trees, and the endless rhythm of lawnmowers in the neighborhood. By then, the children had grown used to a new routine, one that no longer revolved around waiting for their father's return. We made pancakes on Sundays, walked to the farmer's market, played board games at night. There was laughter again, not the brittle kind that hides cracks, but real, bubbling laughter that filled the rooms like sunlight. And yet, when I was alone, the weight of everything would return. Sometimes it came as anger, hot and sharp. Other times as grief, cold and heavy. I would lie awake, replaying years of lies, wondering how much of my life had been real and how much had been performance on his stage. It was like living in a house where every wall had been repainted, only to discover beneath the color was rot. The hardest part was the questions. Luca once asked me why his father didn't come to his soccer game anymore. Sophia asked if the baby would be their brother or sister. Their voices carried innocence, but their words stabbed. I answered as gently as I could, telling them their father loved them but had made choices that meant he could not be with us the same way anymore. They listened, nodded, and returned to their games. But I saw in their eyes the confusion that no child should bear. That was the legacy of his lies, not just to me, but to them. And it hardened my resolve. I would not allow their lives to be built on silence the way mine had been. One evening, I found myself standing in front of the courthouse again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to see the building where everything broke open. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the stone steps glowed faintly in the light. I sat there for a long time, remembering the moment I first heard the truth, the way my body had nearly collapsed, the way the air had been ripped from my chest. But sitting there months later, I realized something had shifted. The building no longer haunted me. It no longer held power over me. It was just stone and glass. The power was in the choice I made to keep walking after leaving those steps. I thought about him, about the life he had chosen, and for the first time the thought did not send me spiraling. He was simply gone, a ghost of a man I once loved, a man who had traded his family for secrecy and shame. I could not change that, but I could choose what came next. And what came next was mine. My reflection in the courthouse glass showed a woman I barely recognized. Tired, yes, but stronger, steadier, sharper. A woman who had walked through betrayal and come out carrying not just wounds, but wisdom. That night, back home, I wrote in my notebook again. This time, not numbers or debts or lies, but dreams. A list of small things I wanted: to take the children to the ocean, to learn a new skill, to read books I had never had time for, to laugh without hesitation. Simple things, but mine. And as I wrote, I felt a calmness spread through me, a quiet conviction that life could be rebuilt, brick by brick, even from ruins. The ocean came sooner than I expected. In late August, I packed the car with a cooler of sandwiches, an old beach umbrella, and 2 excited children who had never seen the sea. We drove for hours, past fields and gas stations, until finally the horizon opened wide and the Atlantic stretched before us, endless and shimmering. The children ran toward the waves with squeals that cut through every shadow left in my chest. I stood on the sand, toes sinking into the warm grains, and let the salt air sting my lungs. For a moment, I felt both tiny and infinite, a single figure on a vast shore, yet connected to something larger than betrayal, larger than grief. The tide pulled forward and back, steady, eternal, and I thought, this is what healing feels like, not sudden or loud, but rhythmic, patient, inevitable. I watched Luca dive headfirst into the surf, fearless, and I saw Sophia build a crooked castle with her small hands, determined that it would stand even as the waves crept closer. Their laughter carried on the wind, and I realized that despite everything, their joy had survived. And if theirs could, so could mine. I walked into the water slowly, letting the foam wrap around my ankles, then my knees, until I was waist deep. The waves pushed against me with force, but I pushed back, laughing when one nearly knocked me off balance. It was a strange baptism, salt and sun and laughter washing away years of silence. I thought of the courtroom, the diner, the sleepless nights. All of it felt distant here, as if the ocean had swallowed it whole. That night, we stayed in a small motel with peeling paint and thin towels, but the children thought it was paradise. We ate pizza from a cardboard box, watched a movie on a flickering television, and fell asleep to the sound of waves crashing outside. I lay in bed with them curled on either side of me, listening to their soft breaths. And I knew we had started something new. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was ours. For the first time in a long time, I did not dream of betrayal. I dreamed of water and light. In the weeks after, I carried that ocean inside me. When bills piled up, when loneliness pressed in, when fear whispered that I couldn't do this alone, I remembered the tide. Forward, back, forward, back. Survival was not a single victory. It was the quiet rhythm of choosing to keep going. I learned to smile again, not the practice smile for others, but the kind that comes from a private well of strength. The scars were still there, sharp and deep, but they no longer ruled me. They reminded me instead of what I had endured, of how far I had walked. And in that strength, I began to see a future not as something stolen from me, but as something waiting. Autumn settled over the town with crisp mornings and trees burning in shades of red and gold. Life had found a rhythm again, quieter but steadier. I walked the children to school under skies washed clean by cool winds, leaves crunching under our shoes. At night, we lit candles on the table, simple dinners filling the house with warmth that no longer depended on anyone else showing up. And still, there were reminders. Letters with his name arriving in the mailbox. Stories drifting through whispers I could not avoid. Sometimes the sight of his handwriting or the echo of his voice on a voicemail would bring the old ache rushing back, sharp as glass. But now, it didn't drown me. It passed like a storm cloud, heavy but temporary, and behind it, there was always light. One evening, while cleaning the closet, I found the box where I had stored my wedding photos. For years I had kept them out of sight, telling myself I would look when things were better, when the pain had dulled. I opened it carefully, the scent of old paper rising. There we were, younger, smiling, holding hands as though nothing could touch us. I stared at the woman in the white dress, the light in her eyes, the trust in her smile. For a long moment, grief washed over me, not just for the marriage lost, but for the version of myself who had believed so completely. I wanted to reach into that photograph, take her hand, and whisper the truth. You will be hurt, but you will not be destroyed. You will be betrayed, but you will not remain broken. You will lose him, but you will find yourself. I closed the box and set it back on the shelf, not with anger, but with calm. The photos were not lies. They were snapshots of a time when I had loved with everything I had. That was not weakness. That was humanity. The betrayal was his choice, not my failure. And in that understanding, I felt something shift. The bitterness that had clung to me for months loosened its grip. In its place came a quiet acceptance, not of what he had done, but of what I had survived. Acceptance that my life was no longer tied to his shadow. Acceptance that I was free to build something different, stronger, even if the path was still uncertain. That weekend, I took Luca and Sophia to the library. We piled books high, everything from fairy tales to history to novels I had always wanted to read. We spent the afternoon sprawled on the living room floor, pages turning, voices rising with laughter as we read aloud. I caught a glimpse of myself reflected in the window, hair messy, eyes tired, but smiling with a truth I hadn't seen in years. And I realized the reflection no longer frightened me. It belonged to someone who had walked through fire and come out carrying her children in her arms. Someone who had built peace out of ruins. Someone who had learned that betrayal was not the last word, but the first page of a new chapter. Winter came, and with it the hush of snow that covered the streets like a clean page. The year had turned, and so had I. By December, the divorce was final, the signatures sealed, the papers filed. He was a name in documents, a shadow in memory, no longer the axis of my days. There were still moments of grief, sudden and sharp, seeing a father walking with his family, catching the scent of a cologne he once wore. But they no longer consumed me. They arrived, they cut, and they passed. What remained was something stronger, the understanding that my life was mine again. On Christmas Eve, I decorated the tree with the children. We strung popcorn garlands, hung paper snowflakes they had made at school, and placed a worn angel at the top. As we stepped back, lights glowing against the dark outside, I felt the first true joy of the season in years. Not because everything was fixed, bills still waited, worries still whispered, but because the weight of lies was gone. The air was lighter. Our laughter was real. That night, as they slept, I sat by the tree alone and whispered a thank you into the silence. Not for the betrayal, never that, but for the strength that had grown from it, for the chance to write again, to dream again, to live without fear of secrets poisoning every corner. Looking back, I saw the arc clearly. Years of sacrifice, manipulation wrapped as love, the impossible requests that drained me, the discovery in court that shattered me, the confrontation that freed me, the rebuilding that tested me, and now this. Reflection, acceptance, and a beginning. Betrayal had once felt like the end of my life. Now I knew it had been the end of an illusion. The life ahead was unwritten, and it was mine to shape. I no longer measured myself by what he had taken. I measured myself by what I had endured and who I had become. As snow fell quietly outside, I understood that healing is not loud. It is not a single triumphant moment. It is the slow gathering of days where laughter returns, where hope grows roots, where scars remind you of battles survived. My story no longer ended in that courtroom. It continued here, in this house, with children who still smiled, with a woman who had found her voice. And when I looked in the mirror now, I did not see loss. I saw survival. I saw freedom. I saw a future waiting, wide and open, like a road after winter, leading me toward whatever I chose. This was not the ending. This was the beginning.